In 1982, John Belushi, who was one of the biggest comedians in the country, one of the biggest movie stars, rock stars, lost his life due to a cocaine heroin mixture called a Speedball. We're gonna go explore what his last days were like here in Los Angeles on the Sunset Strip. And my friend Todd Fisher actually saw John the night before he died. So Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. So this is the Roxy, and this is the club at the Roxy called On the Rocks. So John Belushi had been the biggest star leading up to this. He had always been a standout comedian, even from the time he was young. When he was in high school, he had a band, and he would eventually have the Blues Brothers. When he was in high school, he would also have a comedy troupe, and would eventually go and try out for Second City and be so good that he was the first person they ever put in the group that had not been in the touring company. So he was always standout. When he was in high school, he was the captain of the football team. He was the prom king. He was voted most popular. So eventually he became one of the most popular comedians at Second City, where he would also meet some of his best friends, Dan Aykroyd, Brian Doyle Murray, Harold Ramis, and eventually Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi would become the Blues Brothers together from their experiences at Saturday Night Live. You see, John was actually a big superstar with Saturday Night Live, but originally Lorne Michaels didn't even want John Belushi. John was so good with Second City that he ended up getting a gig doing National Lampoon's Lemmings off Broadway. And some of the people that he was in that with were the people that ended up on Saturday Night Live, like Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, people like that. And after his audition, even though Lorne thought he was funny, he didn't want John Belushi, and everybody on the cast said, "You have to hire John. He's so popular, he's so funny, we really, really need him." So once he was on the show, he was a hit. He was in like the Elizabeth Taylor sketch and doing like Joe Cocker, doing all that stuff. And eventually, while he was doing this, John Landis was going to be directing Animal House, and he wanted John Belushi to be his comic relief in there. And John said he would direct him in Animal House, and then eventually also in the Blues Brothers movie. And he said, when I directed him in Animal House, I got 100% of John. When I directed him in the Blues Brothers, by that point, I was only getting 40% of him. He had a cocaine addiction, and he said, he could hide it behind those sunglasses because we were filming so often with sunglasses, but he said a lot of the times we would need him. We couldn't even find him for the scenes, or if we could find him, he wasn't in any position to be filming anything, putting anything on film. So they said it was, you had to work around what you knew, what he was capable of. You had to work around that because of the state that he was in. So we would see, throughout that span, how his addiction would catch up with him. And even though the Blues Brothers is amazing, John Landis said, I just wish I could have had that extra 60% because I know it would have been so much better. So because of how popular Animal House was, Paramount immediately offered him, I believe it was a 5-picture deal it was either 5 or 6 for $1 million a picture. And so he signed on to do that, and he had some flops in there, like Neighbors, 1941, things that he wanted to do. He wanted to show that he could do more than comedy, and Paramount really didn't necessarily want him to do that. So if you fast forward to 1982, it's after the Blues Brothers, and he had, I think maybe ramped up his cocaine before that, because when he first started doing the Blues Brothers, people were constantly criticizing him thinking that it was a joke. And he said, no, it's not a joke. And you're insulting the band by saying that. I've got some of the best musicians. I give them all credit. We all share the proceeds, you know, that everything we earn, you know, all this. And it just really bothered him that people thought that he wasn't taking it seriously. So he hired a bodyguard during that time when they were getting ready to go on tour to keep him off of drugs. And so during performances, during the tour, because one of the backstories people don't know is that when the movie was done, they had to show it to exhibitors and to see like the people that would own theaters to see if they wanted to have the movie in their theaters. And they showed it, and a lot of people didn't want to have the movie because they said, too many black people in the movie. We don't want to show a black movie in our cinema. So John Landis said where we normally would have debuted in like 1,400 cinemas for the movie, we were only in like 600. So the Blues Brothers had to really amp things up. They had put out their live album, which was fantastic. And my friend Todd Fisher actually is going to talk about, you know, how he was a part of that live album. They had been successful at that, and they took the show on the road and were able to get people to go to the theaters because of the live shows. So now that brings us to the week that John passed away in 1982. He had been out here for 4 days doing cocaine, and the reason for his trip was to meet with Paramount and his manager. And his wife Judy was not able to come. Dan Aykroyd also was in New York City, was not able to come, and both of those people were pretty good about curbing his appetite for drugs. So he didn't start out being like a drug addiction. It was just that John was one of those guys that loved to do everything in excess, whether it was drink, smoke, perform music, listen to music, everything he liked to do a lot of. And so that kind of went hand in hand with his drug use. And so people would just always give him free drugs, and people would have to like stop him from doing it and everything. And on this trip, he was alone. So 4 days he had been doing different drugs, and then had his meeting with Bernie Brillstein, his manager, and Michael Eisner, the head of Paramount Pictures, and they wanted him to do a movie called The Joy of Sex. And that was going to be, I believe, fulfilling his contractual obligation to Paramount for all those movies that he had signed on for. And this was a movie that had been kind of floating around. They'd never really been able to find anybody to do properly, and they thought that, you know, just by putting his name there, people would go see it, and he didn't really want to do it. They were going to start the movie with him in a diaper, and like I said, he was trying to do roles where he branched out. Even though he was a drug addict, he wanted to branch out his roles, not thinking of how it would be affected by what he was doing. So he came to Los Angeles and had that meeting and told them, no, I don't want to do this project. I'm not going to do this project. And they said, well, you know, what are you going to do instead? And he just said, you know, I'm not going to do this. I want to do something different. But then he told his manager, Bernie Brillstein, in the meeting, hey, I need $1,800 to go buy a guitar. And actually during that meeting, Dan Aykroyd called in the meeting and told him, John, do not do this movie. You don't have to do this. So he was pretty much dead set on not doing it. Bernie Brillstein ended up giving him the cash, and when John left, he immediately drove down Sunset Boulevard and went to a woman's house who he knew would have cocaine, and there Kathy Smith was, and Kathy would be who John would spend the rest of his evening with that night, giving him drugs. So at first John did some cocaine with the two women, and then he told Kathy that he wanted to do heroin. And so they went off to go find some heroin, which of course they did. And then they came to the Roxy here, which is why we're here. And they went to the private club that was upstairs called On the Rocks. Now, this wall right here, if you've ever seen the first Cheech and Chong movie, that's where everybody's lined up, hung over and everything, waiting during the Battle of the Bands. They're all out there, and that's the door that we see in the movie. But right on the other side of this wall, literally upstairs, is where John Belushi spent 5 hours that night. And apparently while he was here, he was telling people about, lamenting about this movie that they wanted him to do. But he had, somewhere in the middle of this day, or somewhere during his drug binge, decided to call Michael Eisner and call Bernie Brillstein and say, okay, I'll do the movie. And they're like, what? And he said, oh yeah, I'll do the movie. So he ended up coming here complaining about telling people that he was going to do the movie, and then went into the bathroom here, which I've actually been in. Went into the bathroom upstairs, and Kathy shot him up with a Speedball, mixture of cocaine and heroin. And he would continue drinking here for hours. And this is where my friend Todd Fisher ran into John Belushi that night. Apparently Robin Williams also had run into John Belushi that night. It's just so crazy because Dan Aykroyd said he got a rambling message on his answering machine during the time that John would have been here, and he said, I couldn't even decipher what he was saying, but I knew like we were in trouble. So I called his wife Judy and said, hey, we gotta do something. Sounds like John's on a big binge. And so they called the bodyguard who worked with John and kept him off of drugs during the Blues Brothers tour. And Judy said, can you go out and help him? And he said, yes, I will go out there and help him. And before he could even make it out here, John had passed away at his room at the Chateau Marmont. So we're gonna go down to the Chateau now. It's crazy, I performed a show here, like on guitar. A friend of mine was doing a show here and invited me to be a part of it. And I just kept thinking while I was here, like, I can't believe this is where he spent that last night, and that this stairwell that leads right up and this doorway and everything, this is how he would have come and gone that night to his last night on earth. So as Kathy and John made their way down to the Chateau Marmont down Sunset Boulevard, John actually had her pull over so he could throw up out of the side of the car door. He was staying in room 3 up here, and I remember in Ralph Macchio's book he says that they were gonna, when he was down to being the final person considered for the Karate Kid, they wanted to put him up in a room there, and he said, no, I don't want to stay there because I know John Belushi died. That's kind of what a lot of people knew it from. And they end up putting him in another place, and then he finds out a weekend that's where Freddie Prinze had died. So Chateau Marmont is about a mile down the road. And right up there on the hill it is. Chateau Marmont. This is where John was staying for that stay, and he would have been in Bungalow 3, which was actually over behind this set of shrubbery. And I know that because when I used to work at Jerry's Famous Deli, I had a delivery to Bungalow 3 one day, and when I got there it was Michael Madsen. He happened to be staying in it, so I actually have been in that room. So Kathy Smith drove John back here, back to his bungalow, and apparently he immediately went into the bathroom and threw up, and then smoked a joint and did a line and played his guitar for a little bit, and then he passed out for a little bit and woke up again, and she injected him again, and then he started saying that he was feeling tired and he laid down. About the last time that he was injected, and Kathy eventually ordered some breakfast, wrote a letter, took the syringe and everything, and then went to check on John as she left. She said that he was snoring, and she left. And then John's assistant showed up to bring him a typewriter and found John, of course, unresponsive and dead. His assistant said when he got here, he knew something immediately was wrong because he didn't hear John snoring the way he normally did. When he went in there, he said, come on, it's time to get up, and nothing happened. You could see he wasn't breathing, so he started pounding on his chest saying, get up, you dumb SOB, get up, I can't believe you did this. And he called the hotel staff and told them to get a paramedic. They laid John out thinking it was a heart attack, not knowing he was already dead. They called his manager, Bernie Brillstein, And Bernie was already at the hospital waiting for the ambulance. And while he was waiting, he got a phone call and they said, it's too late, John's already dead. It's not like people didn't see it coming, but man, John Belushi was gone. Dan Aykroyd had said, you know, I was so bummed because I told him not to take that movie because I was writing Ghostbusters and I was going to put him in Ghostbusters, which would have been huge. So Bernie Brillstein, his manager, then found out, of course, and had to call Dan Aykroyd and tell Dan, said, my phone's lighting up like a Keno board. John's passed away, he's gone. And Dan Aykroyd had to go over and tell Judy Belushi. Of course, when something like that happens, everyone kind of wonders, you know, if they could have stopped it. And Bernie Brillstein, especially because he was the one that gave John the advance, the $1,800 in his office that day when John said he wanted to buy a guitar and used it for drugs. And as you can see, forever and ever and on, he was a tourist attraction now because of dying here at the Chateau Marmont. So all day long, every day, Hollywood tour buses are stopping here telling his story. When they did an autopsy, they saw all the needle marks all over both of his arms and knew exactly what it was. So then they went looking for Kathy, and Kathy admitted to what she did. So she was charged with manslaughter and served 15 months. And John's death, they almost didn't even call it an overdose. They said it was like, it was beyond even an overdose, that he had gone so far into almost shock from it. So they're pretty sad. He was eventually buried in Martha's Vineyard, where he had a home. Dan Aykroyd also had a home. Ironically, they bought those homes with their first royalty check from Briefcase Full of Blues. And Judy and Dan said that was a place that John always felt comfortable and loved to lay on the beach, and he could finally relax there. So they buried him there. And then it was rumored that his body was moved to an undisclosed location so that fans wouldn't disturb it. Rest in peace, John Belushi. You can only imagine the amazing things he would have done with his career had he been able to clean up and continue on. I mean, imagine what kind of part Dan could have wrote him for Ghostbusters, like where that would have gone, what they could have done. So it's pretty sad. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you for watching, and rest in peace, John Belushi, and now Judy Belushi.